everything that happens in our gut lumen, especially if there's any barrier breach like leaky gut or inflammation or post-infection or the wrong foods, these things have such a small layer to go through to affect our entire bloodstream and immune system. And there's proof in the concept because the largest percentage of our immune cells actually line the gut. But what I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years as the most powerful future of functional and integrative and personalized medicine is how do we work with trauma in our systems? If we don't feel safe in our body, we cannot heal.
Welcome to The Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works. Welcome back to The Trusted Pharmacist. I'm your host, Steve Hoffart, where we pull back the curtain on the healthcare system and empower you with real, actionable knowledge about how the body works. Today's guest is Dr. Jill Carnahan, a true pioneer in functional medicine, board certified in both family medicine and integrative holistic medicine. She specializes in treating complex chronic illness, GI dysfunction, and mast cell activation. She is also a survivor of both breast cancer and Crohn's disease, which radically transfer how she practices medicine. She's the founder of Flatiron Functional Medicine in Boulder, Colorado, and author of the perspective memoir, Unexpected: Finding Resilience Through Functional Medicine, Science, and Faith. And her documentary, Doctor Patient, offers a raw, powerful look at what it means to heal from both sides of the exam table. Welcome, Dr. Jill. So great to have you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm so delighted to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like you said, I'm ready to jump in. I do, like you said, I know we're going to have a lot of science, but I'm really excited about the healing and the inspiration that we're going to talk about today. So just to jump right in, I know you've had a real medical journey. You've struggled and you've had both breast cancer at a young age, Crohn's disease. I would like to know, can you tell me how those diagnoses and your medical journey has really shaped the way you practice medicine today?
Yeah, so nowadays I know I'm a healer, but back when I was a young girl growing up on a farm in central Illinois, I was one of 5 kids and my mom was a retired nurse who retired to help raise all of us. And I guess I knew that there was power in the soil and the food that we ate, and a lot of the basics of holistic principles were part of our family life growing up. And then I thought, well, maybe I could go into medicine, and I went into medical school and was training. And I always had this idea that our medical system is obviously the best reimbursed system in the US, but it doesn't have all the answers. And so I went into medical school knowing there was some important stuff to learn there. I wanted to learn the physiology, the diagnosis, and all the basics, because if you have a car accident or a heart attack or a stroke, you still want to be in the best, westernized medical system available. But what I also knew at the same time, even though I didn't know a lot, was that there was more to health than just medications and surgery. And I grew up, with a garden with organic produce and realizing that food was medicine. So I had this idea that there was more. And then it wasn't until my 3rd year getting diagnosed with breast cancer that I kind of had to put it all together on the other side of the table. As you mentioned, I did all the conventional, pretty aggressive chemo radiation surgery. I was really in a battle of my life. But at the same time, I saw a naturopath and I used prayer, meditation, and community and connection. And I feel like here I am 20 plus years later, completely free of cancer. And a lot of it was that experience as a patient, like seeing what it felt like to be given a life-threatening diagnosis. And then the biggest thing, Steve, that's kind of interesting, and I'm sure your patients can relate, we think medicine is black and white. We think, okay, I have this diagnosis, the doctor has this solution for me. And the truth is there's so many shades of gray that I realized with my own treatment, I kind of had to be an advocate for the kind of treatment I received, the kind of drugs I had for chemo, and because there was no one size fits all. And the more I give patients permission to participate in their own treatment and help me to figure out the best thing for them, the more empowered they are and the more they go on to live and survive a long, healthy life.
That's so powerful. And you nailed it. I mean, it is so personalized what we do and this journey we're on and how we get there from what our past has taught us where they're at. And that's, like in your book, Unexpected, for instance, like you talk about that, how illness, is your greatest teacher. It's how you get your body to where it needs to be. If you had to pick just a couple surprising lessons that illness has taught you, just kind of right off the bat, what are those lessons that the illnesses you've been through have taught you?
Number one is this concept of grit. There's been several books written about grit and mindset. One of my favorite authors, who's been through way more horrific experiences, is Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. And all these people have taught me that no matter what you face in your life, no matter what suffering, what diagnosis, what situation, financial loss, divorce, loss of a loved one, there's always an ability to choose your mindset and to choose how you face that situation. And I remember very young, being believing that I could overcome, believing that I could do great things. And then I faced cancer, right? And that same grit went into part of my treatment. And I think sometimes that survival is based on grit. And so that choice to how do I, and for me, what it was right away within a week or so of my diagnosis, um, I realized that I could either be like, oh no, I'm going to die. This is awful. Why did this happen to me? Or I could be like, okay, it's here. I'm not changing this diagnosis. How do I take this suffering and turn it into something that's either a lesson, a teacher, a transformational event? And when we look at suffering in the eyes of a teacher or transformation, it changes everything. Because then all of a sudden there's something really cool that we're looking for inside of the suffering. And I'm not minimizing pain or suffering. And those who suffer long or many years, it doesn't take that away, but it does give you something to look forward to. And when you reframe, all of a sudden you find there's incredible power in having gone through things. And then you can take what you've experienced and share it with other people to help transform their lives as well.
That's powerful. And I think the journeys, you're right, that we go on, especially as healthcare experts, and what we've been through in our lessons help us better to translate those feelings, those thoughts. And you've seen it too. It's if you give the patient the right tools and that patient has the mindset that they want to heal, the power of those two together is incredible. It is amazing what you see happens with patients. I know you do that all the time. I've heard your stories. And like you said, in your documentary, the stories of the power of the belief and the tools and what the body can do when it's put in that right mindset. And that's
Exactly.
so amazing.
And as a pharmacist or physician, we have this container, this ability to frame our patients and so we actually have the power to help them also frame and to either, in fact, I was just on a recording earlier today talking to a cardiologist from New England who was basically saying how just listening to the patient is half the healing because you're validating them. And I think that's so powerful.
And you nailed it. I think that's one thing as we go through our health journeys personally, it teaches us to be better healers, because I think that's the problem nowadays. People are thrown so many pieces of information and they think they hear this one thing, oh, that's me, or they hear that one thing, that's me. And I think that's the power of what you do and your ability to listen and frame what you said to be able to put people on a good journey path versus just being spread everywhere. Because you're right, the body doesn't have an infinite ability to heal, but it has an amazing ability to heal when it's given the right journey and path. So that's a great, excellent call out. I love all the stuff you talk about. When you first taught me many years ago, we talked about gut health and we looked at the power of the gut. Why do you think so much chronic illness stems from an unhealthy gut?
Yeah, so our gut, many people know this, but it's funny when we call it out. It's the lumen, which is our interface with the environment, right? And there's one cell layer between our lumen, which is our mouth to our anus all the way down, and the immune system in the blood. So everything that happens in our gut lumen, especially if there's any barrier breach like leaky gut or inflammation or post-infection or the wrong foods, these things have such a small layer to go through to affect our entire bloodstream and immune system. And there's proof in the concept because the largest percentage of our immune cells actually line the gut. It's kind of like the barrier, the warriors, the citadel on the gut lumen. But what can happen is as we get an onslaught of chemicals in our food, like glyphosate and atrazine and plastics now, and all of these things that are in our food supply, and then we get inflammation, chronic infection, toxic exposure like mold, which is a whole nother topic we can talk about. These things create barrier breach. So then we have leakage of the gut lumen contents into the bloodstream. And right there is the majority of our immune system waiting, trying to protect us. And all of a sudden these things come in and it starts to go overactive. And there's this thing called molecular mimicry to where, say, a bacterial coating called LPS crosses over into the bloodstream and the body's like, whoa, this is not supposed to be here. And then we start this cycle, this vicious cycle of immune inflammation. And so many of our chronic conditions, whether it's chronic fatigue, subjective cognitive decline, or autoimmunity, neurological disorders, they often start when this immune system starts to be dysfunctional and overactive. And that can often be traced back to an issue in the gut.
Got it. And I've heard you talk about before this whole immune system challenge. And you're right. It's that gut kind of starts that flame gurney. And then our immune system gets tricked into 1A. And I've heard you mention this before about trying to keep things in check in terms of cancer and our own stuff. But then this autoimmunity and that balance. Could you explain that a little bit? Because I love that analogy, how you explain how it doesn't take much, but when we tip that over the top, that's when the problems start to happen.
Yeah, so autoimmunity, back in the work of Fasano, who's so brilliant, he discovered zonulin, which I think of as the trapdoor that opens and closes those. So if you think about tiles on your bathroom wall, that's an equivalent of the cells that line the gut lumen. They're called enterocytes. They're just like tiles. And between those tiles would be the grout. Well, if the grout gets dissolved because of mold exposure, poor diet, inflammation, poor fats in your diet, stress, psychological stress, lack of sleep, or any number of insults, all of a sudden you have this dumping of contents into the immune system. So at the core of autoimmunity is three things. One is genetic susceptibility. So many people have proneness to celiac disease or proneness to Crohn's like I did, or proneness to rheumatoid arthritis. And these are genetic predispositions that create more immune inflammation with a stimulus trigger. The second part of that is an environmental insult. And that could be as simple as gluten in the case of celiac, where this exogenous molecule starts to trigger the immune system into overreaction. And then we have this other piece, which is the gut immune interface, which we already talked about. So that triad, your genetics, your predisposition, which we often can't change, the environmental insult, which could be anything from glyphosate, mold, atrazine, heavy metals, infections, long COVID, some sort of thing there. And then the third one is that gut immune interface. When we understand that triad of autoimmunity, we realize that we have control over the gut immune interface. We can strengthen the gut. We can change the diet. We can change the immune insults. And then the not only gut immune interface, but this environmental insults. And for that, sometimes it's taking out certain foods or it's taking out chemicals. And I always go back to clean air, clean water, clean food, some of the real basics, because people can get that. It's not expensive. And those things can actually modulate the immune system and either prevent or reverse autoimmune disease.
And I love that. And I didn't even tell you this. Actuality, starting at our pharmacy next month, we have partnered with MD Lifespan to put a TPE clinic in our store. Because you mentioned it's many of these toxins that push people over the top. That light that fire. And then next thing you know, autoimmunity and all the things that go wrong. So that's great. You brought that up. So I like what you just said. You mentioned those three big things that people can work on that can help set this immune system kind of, at least do their part to help put the immune system back. Would you go over those three again? I like that you brought that up.
Yeah. So at the top here, we can think of as genetic predisposition. Now, even though we say genetics are inheritable, right? There's still stuff you can do, because epigenetics means how do we express those genes? So if you're poor methylator, for example, and you give methylated B12, methylated folate, B6, and riboflavin, you can actually overcome that predisposition to not methylate. And any number of genetics can be modulated, even with stress or other interventions, but genetics is harder to move the needle. The second piece is the gut immune interface. And there is a ton we can do here. Everything from bovine immune globulins to spore probiotics to glutamine powder. And I always say, of course, the 5R program of the gut, we could go deep into that, but the core is get rid of the bad, infections, toxins, parasites, mold, processed food or chemically altered food. Add in the things that we need, like probiotics, maybe the fuel the enterocytes like butyric acid or glutamine powder, and then rid your body of inflammation and stress. And that's going to affect the gut immune interface. And then this environmental insults goes into things like chemicals, exposures, parabens, phthalates, mold, heavy metals, all the exotoxins that we get exposed to in our food supply, in our water supply. But also the internal toxins people forget about, which could be if you have a yeast overgrowth in the gut, if you have a bacterial overgrowth in the gut like SIBO or SIFO, if you have a parasite infection, and even as deep as emotion. So if you have anger, loneliness, jealousy, rage, all these things, or lack of connection to people, those affect the internal toxic load as well.
So I would love to jump into that. We always talk about we have that gut feeling and all that, and how important that whole interface between our emotions and our stress have an effect on our overall health. Give me your take on that. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. So psychological stress, there's this beautiful balance, because if we have no stress at all, we talk about flow states. I love to talk about flow, which is like our optimal performance, one where it's timeless, effortless. People will talk about if they're making a music symphony, writing a book, if they're surfing or skiing extreme or rock climbing, and many, many other experiences in these states where it's just, we are in flow. All of a sudden, 5 hours have passed. We don't even realize it. Everybody can relate to that. In those states of flow, there's this optimal level of neurochemicals and this minimal level of stress, but just enough stress to where it's good. And I like to talk about stress with that framework, because we could never get into flow states without a little bit of stress. We need stress. It motivates us. Without stress, we have no motivation to do anything. So there's a good stress, but then we tip over the edge. And this too much stress is like when we have the schedules that are like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this day. I have back to back to back to back appointments of people, or someone slams on their brakes and rear ends you, or someone you love has just been diagnosed with a terminal illness, or any number of things. And the things that are stress related that cause harm to our system can be broken down into an acronym called NUTS. Hans Selye did this work years and years ago, and it's novelty, something new we have no experience with. The U is unpredictability. We can't predict an outcome. T is threat to self or threat to ego. And this was very high in the pandemic because our health was affected, our stress was affected, threat to ourselves, and then sense of control. So we have no control over it. So any of those things, and especially all four together, novelty, unpredictability, threat to self, and sense of control, that creates stress because we have no control over what's happening and we feel out of control. And it's not the stress, it's the feeling that we have no control over it that causes the physiological damage. So anytime we can regain control or have autonomy or agency, a big bad stressor that could have caused harm doesn't become that. And this goes back to my story earlier with cancer, right? You could have this cancer, unpredictable, threat to your health, threat to ego, lack of control, like everything in the NUTS acronym is automated there, is activated there. But if all of a sudden you can take control by saying, wait, okay, this is happening, I can't change it, but maybe there's something I can do. Maybe I can have control over my treatment. Maybe I can actually choose to learn something from this. And all of a sudden you take back control and it becomes less stressful. So as we understand the NUTS and then we use that to modulate our ability to feel like we have agency in any situation, the stressors become not so stressful.
No, that's really, really awesome. And I know you talk a lot about how we deal with past trauma and how that adds to this stress, and then how we're able to get ourselves out to allow the body to heal. Because if we can't work on that inner healing to allow us to get back, our body really struggles to turn the corner and get back. Tell me about how somebody who's basically, you've like their chronic illness is rooted in past emotional stress, how they can work themselves out of that to basically get back to healing.
Steve, I love this topic because I've been doing functional medicine over 20 years, and there's incredible things with lifestyle, diet, nutrition, supplements, all the things we do. But what I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years as the most powerful future of functional and integrative and personalized medicine is how do we work with trauma in our systems? And so what happens with trauma is we have these subconscious patterns that create threat. And I always say, in fact, I gave a lecture last fall at one of Jeff Bland's events, and I framed it around, do we feel safe in our body? Because if we don't feel safe in our body for some reason or another, there's no amount of supplements, diet, lifestyle, even this new plasma exchange, which I'm all on board. I love it. With MD Lifespan, any of these things, if we don't feel safe in our body, we cannot heal. So no amount of any of these things will help. So I always go back to that. And it starts with you if you're consulting with a patient, or me if I'm in the clinic. I always say we want to create a container for safety for that patient. And that's being seen, being acknowledged, being heard, letting them tell their story, greeting them with kindness and empathy, making sure they have a glass of water, making sure they're not too cold or too hot. Very basic things start by creating the space for them to sit in my office with me and feel seen and heard and feel safe. Because once they feel safe, then they'll start to tell me their story and tell me what's happening. And that safety, that connection between myself and the patient, and then them being able to really feel like they can be heard, is the start of healing. And any sort of trauma we might have had, whether it's a severe abusive situation in our past, or even the small T traumas, which we all have, starts by creating a new story. So we go back and say, oh, well, in this situation, I felt unheard, unseen. I was too much. I was too little. I was not enough. I was whatever thing that we tell ourselves, and they're all common to humans. If we name any of those common trauma patterns, all of us have some forms of those different things. But if we can retell that story and create a safety in our body. And so how do we do that? First, we have to identify what are those patterns of thinking that are dysfunctional. For me, it was 2 different things, which is kind of weird. You have one that's not enough. I had to achieve, and achievement was my way to love. To being accepted was like achieving. So I always saw that I got acknowledged and seen, and my parents were amazing and they showed me great love, but somehow I got the wrong message. It wasn't them. They did nothing wrong. But with that, I somehow thought, oh, I'm going to be more loved am more accepted if I achieve honors and if I am in the student council and if I go to medical school. So that achievement got equated with love. And I had to disconnect that and say, wait, my doing is not going to cause someone to love me more. I had to rewrite the script and say, me just being born, that's enough to be loved. And I had to rewrite that script. But that all of a sudden, my body is not trying to be on a treadmill that's going to cause stress and overwhelm and lack of sleep and overwork to get that love that we all desire. Another story some people have is I'm not enough. I'm too small. I'm too quiet. I'm not talented enough, whatever. And we all have talents. So we kind of find where are those things that we excel at. And maybe that is enough. And I could name many, many more, but a lot of these programs are around what is our thought process. We have to identify that. And then we get to rewrite the script. Now, real quickly, how do we rewrite the script? Because that's a whole big thing. Now, there's therapists. I've been to many, many of them, and I will continue the rest of my life. But if you want to do work yourself, the first thing is identifying what are those patterns of thinking that you have that are common, that are not true. And then you rewrite them. And how we rewrite things is by repatterning the subconscious. Subconscious goes by emotion and repetition. So what that means is if we say anything enough with emotion, it will be installed as a new program, just like an operating system on our MacBook or our computer. We reinstall the programming and set a new intention. One thing I did years ago was every day in every way, I'm stronger, I'm healthier, I'm wealthier, I'm more resilient, I'm younger, more beautiful. I will overcome all obstacles. I will outlast all adversity. Things are turning in my favor. I said that enough. You can hear me now. I mean, it's just part of who I am. And it turned out those things became true as my body started to believe that that was true.
That's so powerful. And I love what you said. And I would agree. I think we as practitioners that are in functional medicine, the most powerful thing we can do, and I tell myself all the time, the one thing people will never forget about you is how you made them feel. And you're right. If somebody can walk into your clinic or your office or the pharmacy and you're there to listen and you take what they have to say and you help them, like you said, rewrite that story that set them down a bad path. That's the power. That's more powerful than any drug that I can dispense or
Yes.
anything that we can run. And that's what's so really cool about what we do.
Yeah, it is. And we get the privilege of seeing me. Like I get so excited about even one patient that comes back and said, this changed my life. Because is there anything greater than more satisfying than helping someone to transform?
Right. No, that's exactly it. Along that same line, we talk about but things that go wrong. You're right, because mental, emotionally, if we're not right, everything else seems to go haywire. One of the things that we are seeing that I see lately all the time that when I got out of pharmacy school, I don't even think I even knew what it was this whole mast cell activation. And I know you are a true advocate for this because I see all the stuff you write. You write great articles just in a basic sense because it manifests itself in a lot of different ways and people probably don't even know they have it. What exactly is mast cell activation syndrome, and how do you see that manifest itself in your practice?
Well, this is so relevant to trauma because at the core, the story is mast cells are primordial cells that are protectors. They're the oldest cells in our immune system that have been around forever. And some people genetically have these hyperactive mast cells. But there's a connection to trauma and safety because I would say 80%, maybe 90% of the patients that I see that have some form of mast cell disorders also have these trauma pieces, some small, some big, that as they heal them, the mast cells also get better. So what happens with the mast cells is there's something that triggers. It can be heat, it can be cold, it can be chemical, toxin, infection, or any number of other things that starts to tickle those mast cells and they get irritable. And then they start to throw out their hundreds of things like prostaglandins and histamine and create swelling, create elevated heart rate, create brain fog, create all kinds of, and really it's a multi-symptom diagnosis. In fact, that's consensus 2 criteria talks about you have to have 2 or more systems. So say brain fog plus gut issues like leaky gut or abdominal pain or heartburn plus tachycardia. You have to have multi-symptom in order to diagnose it because it happens all over the body. And these mast cells, when they throw out their things, they cause inflammation, they cause activation, they cause symptoms. So going back, I always start with mast cell activation disorders as healing the safety piece, because in order to start to heal, that patient has to feel safe. So they do that work. And I'm not the expert, but I know a lot of experts. So I'll send them to a therapist or a coach or someone to start to work through those things. And then from my perspective, it's often layering. First of all, it's kind of like the gut. You want to take out if there's mold exposure, which is a very common trigger of mast cell. If it's post-infection, which long COVID, a lot of patients have mast cell activation post-virally or post-Lyme or tick-borne infection or post-Epstein-Barr, like a sore throat turns into mono, turns into Epstein-Barr and chronic fatigue. So all of these things, if you find an infectious insult or a toxic insult, you have to go about getting those out of the environment or treating the infection. And then you have to calm those mast cells down. And usually there's an order, and people often need multiple layers. You can use H1 blockers, H2 blockers. You can use mast cell stabilizers. You can use steroids in severe cases. You can use immune modulators. And there's a whole bunch of natural substances like nettles and quercetin and luteolin and Chinese skullcap and on, where you can layer these things and start to control the mast cells. And that's really the synopsis of what you would do in those situations.
That's awesome. And that's a great analogy. And my other question for you on that is, and you mentioned this, if a patient has this tremendous amount of stress, these past traumas, to where it basically has the immune system on a heightened alert that it shouldn't be on, in your experience, have you seen those things really have to be addressed? Because we can throw supplements and we can throw these other things on there, but people just don't get well. Or do you see that quite commonly in your practice?
I do. I wish that were true, but I do. Now, again, you don't have to go out and pay a therapist. You can actually do some of this on your own. And there's so many good books out there. If you want to read Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, Richard Schwartz, and there's many, many more, but those are just a few of the handfuls that have really talked a lot about trauma and the things that we can do. And again, you could read these, you can start to do the work on your own. But I always start with that limbic system. If you don't want to read a book, you can do binaural beats. You can do Safe and Sound by Stephen Porges. You can do Gupta program. You could do Annie Hopper's DNRS. You can do the Primal Trust with Dr. Kat. You can do neuro-linguistic reprogramming. You can do medical hypnosis. And as you can see, I've put a list of about 20 different ways that you can address this. And so and a lot of these are online programs. They're books you can read. There's the music is just binaural beats is just get a set of headphones, and it's a different frequency in each ear, but it creates kind of a safety in your parasympathetic system. So there's many ways that you can do this, and many of them don't cost a lot of money. Vagal nerve stimulators, anything to do with vagus nerve. So lots and lots of ways you can start to address this.
So I love all that, because as you were going through medical school and me as a pharmacist, like that stuff was never even discussed, talked about. Like it's the craziest thing. And as we work with patients, we see these are some of the most powerful tools we have to actually get a patient moving in the right direction. So I love that. I mean, you see it, I see it, but sometimes people just have to hear like, this is for real. I remember when it was dealing with stress, people would talk about something as simple as breath work. And I'm like, whatever, breath work. But I'm like, no, breath work really works. Like there's too much science behind saying it doesn't. So that's really neat that you bring that up as far as that goes.
It's so powerful. It's interesting, just breath work, just a little scenario. So I had anesthesia for a little surgical procedure, everything fine, no big deal. But that was like 2 weeks ago. I'm still having a little air hunger. And this morning I was driving to an appointment. I was like, what is going on? Did I get another exposure? And like, oh, I'm still having a little post anesthesia. Like that triggers I was just thinking through it. And I'm like, I'm sure that anesthesia triggers my body to feel like I'm not getting enough air. And I'm still like subconsciously, even though I'm fine and I know I'm fine. And you know what I did on the way? I was like, well, I can do breath work. So I did box breathing on my way and I felt a million times better. But it was like back to that agency and stress. The moment I felt air, and I'm like, what's going on? And I started to fear, like, what? Is something wrong with me? Did I get a mold exposure? And then I'm like, oh, wait, all I have to do is calm my body, do breath. Who cares what happened? And now I know it was probably related to the anesthesia. But it's interesting. I'm saying that story because here I am. I do the work. I've done thousands of hours of therapy, and I'm driving this morning and having air hunger going, what's going on? And my mind's starting to go down a story, right? And like, wait a second, let's come back. And there's something as simple as changing my breathing, and I feel better. And anyone can do that, right?
No, I love that. I have to find myself when I'm in traffic. That's like, that's my go-to medicine in traffic. It's like, all right, you're not going to fix anything. You're not going anywhere. Start breathing and work on what you should do. Because all you're doing is wrecking your health. It's just not worth it. I love that as far as that goes. You talk about it in a lot of your lectures that I've been to about diet and how fundamentally, functionally important it is and things like that. If you were going to talk about, I don't want to get deep in the weeds about an ideal diet. What type of diet protocol do you recommend for most of your patients? Is it very diverse? Are there certain key elements you stick with that? What are the key things you look for in a diet for your patients in terms of their healing?
Yeah, I love this question because there is a lot of misinformation with the influencers out on social media, carnivore diet, and this and that and that. The truth is there's no one size fits all, but there's principles that underlie almost every great diet. Sometimes for a short period of time, I will do an elimination diet or a low FODMAP diet or a fairly restrictive diet. But even in those situations, I have a very significant or a very specific goal. For example, if I'm treating SIBO, we would do a low FODMAP diet for 4 to 6 months. And then we want to add diversity back because we know our microbiome thrives on diversity, things like polyphenols and fresh fruits and vegetables. And I think the data is very consistent in that we need plants. Plants in our diet consistently over the long haul are important. Now, sometimes when people have really bad SIBO or SIFO, the worst thing they can do is have tons of legumes and plants and things, and they feel terrible. Even me after Crohn's, I am on a mostly paleo diet, which is grain-free and legume-free, right? But what I still do within that is as much diversity with polyphenols or fiber-rich foods, plants for sure. And then as far as like meat or no meat, again, that depends. Many people with gut disorders cannot adequately assimilate plant protein. So I find it's much harder to do a vegetarian or vegan diet without even just a little bit of fish or chicken, and it get to pay on the person. So somewhere in that range where you need plants, most people need a little animal protein in order to absorb, especially if they've had gut issues. And what happens with those totally vegan or vegetarian diets is, first of all, they're harder to assimilate the protein for those with difficult guts. And there's so many fibrous carbs that they do have SIBO or SIFO, it's a problem. But the core principle is diversity, organic fruits and vegetables, non-processed, minimize sugar and alcohol. And most of my patients do better gluten-free and many of them dairy-free as well.
That's some great advice. I love all that. And you're spot on with a lot that we preach and teach. So that's awesome. I kind of want to take a few minutes and jump into something that I know you put your heart and soul into. And I really enjoyed watching it. And I think it's so powerful because it teaches us not only a lot about life and people in general, but about ourselves. And that's your documentary, Doctor Patient. And I will say it's raw, it's honest, but I could tell by watching a couple of your things about what all you did to make that happen. And I want to know this as far as it goes. What drove you to do that, let's say in a film versus like a book? I know you have your book, but like versus a book or just going out and doing lectures, like you did something on a broader scale that you put your heart and soul into, because that's the part that I love about you, Jill. Your passion for wanting to make change and help people make change is so vibrant. Tell me why you chose to go the film documentary side versus another avenue.
Oh, Steve, I love that. So many beautiful things that have happened in my life have been almost like a calling. Like I never went out and said, I'm going to do a documentary. I was in the midst of writing my book. And I remember 2021, I believe, right in the midst of the pandemic, no, maybe even 2020. And everybody's locked down. Everybody's on Netflix, right? And my thought was January 1st, I was like, well, everybody is watching television, watching shows. What if no one reads a book? What if no one's going to what if reading is extinct, which of course is now, but in my mind is like, I need to be on screens. And as you mentioned, the thing has driven me, we never made a penny as far as like back on the movie. That wasn't a financial decision. What it was how do I influence and impact more people for good? Like, how do we get the word out there? So that moment, I was like, well, what if we did documentary? And here's the lesson in your list for your listeners. I've never done a documentary before. I've never produced a movie before. I have no clue what I'm doing. But the difference was I was like, well, anything's possible, right? What if this could happen? And I started talking to people. And within a very short period of time with the director, the producer, we had a team. And they're like, we're going to do this. And I'm like, well, how much money do you need? And now we need about $1 million to do this. So once again, the thing that I want to share here is not that I did anything special. I didn't, but I did believe. I had faith to believe something was possible that seemed very impossible. And when you go out, this is part of manifesting. There's no magic formula, but if you have a vision and the vision has a pure intent, I wanted to help people. I wanted to inspire people. And then you believe that it's possible. That's half the battle. I sat, and knew this could happen. And then shortly later, we met an incredible investor who was willing to put in the money to make that happen. And then all of a sudden we're filming. And so I figured it out along the way. But the biggest lesson was believing that something that you think seems impossible is possible, whether it's buying a home that you never thought was possible, or starting a new practice, or starting to do plasma exchange in your office, or one of these things, right? Or me hiring new mid-levels, or whatever, any million of things that someone could think about. If you're out there and like, well, that seems too big, it's not. You have to believe that it can happen. And then with that energy going out into the world will draw the resources, the people. I remember, 12 years ago when I started writing my book, I was in kind of a retreat time of prayer and meditation. And I was like talking to God. I'm like, God, I can't do this. I'm not a writer. I don't know what I'm doing. I remember just getting this download of like, all you have to do is tell your story. All you have to do is tell your story. The publisher, the marketing, all that's going to come. And that's what happened in the movie and the book and everything I've ever done. I don't know what I'm doing, Steve, but I do have a passion. And when I go out in the world with that passion and belief that it's possible, in my chapter 4 of my book, it's called Believe, act, wait. I realized writing the book, that was my formula. I believed in something crazy. I would act in my power, the small little piece that I could do. And then I would wait. I'm like, okay, guys, I need some help here. And somehow always it would come, like the people I needed, the help I needed, the resources. And that's a lesson for your listeners, is that we can accomplish anything we set our mind to, and we don't have to have all the resources. We just have to have the belief that it's possible and showing up in the world in that way.
That's really cool, because that was one of my questions I was going to be is, I mean, you put your heart and soul in that, and it's trying to get that message out as far as our, let me ask you this, in doing the documentary, I know what your message is for the public or for those that watch it. What did you learn about yourself? You kind of mentioned it, but what did you learn about yourself through the process of doing the documentary?
Oh, such a great question. And I want to go even deeper, because many people know, many people don't know. The producer of the movie was my ex-husband. And what happened in the movie was something we could have never, and we've been friends, so it wasn't shocking that we worked together, but we are not together. We're in separate relationships. But what happened in that transformational making of the movie was we went to another level of understanding and compassion and forgiveness. And we got to model to the world, how can you take a divorce, a traumatic divorce, and a complete, breakup of two people, and actually demonstrate how they can go on and do things in the world with kindness and grace and forgiveness, and blessing and honor. Because if we had more relationships, whether it's work relationships where a boss, fires an employee, or a divorce, or even parents and children nowadays, there's so many broken relationships out there. And one thing that happened that we didn't expect was this ability to tell a story that's way deeper than the movie. And it's, how can two ex-spouses work together to create something like that?
That's incredible, because that just ties totally back into what we talked about at the beginning, is we took a past trauma and we worked on it. We rewrote that story and made it a positive. So that's really pretty cool how that all worked out. That's really, really pretty neat.
I did not expect it. I'll just say that.
I understand. Hey, God works in strange ways sometimes. That's for sure. Just, I could ask you a million questions, but I want to ask you one final question that I ask all my guests. You've got a wealth of knowledge, and you talked about your past. Now, if you could go back and look at anything that you've done in your past, knowing where you're at today, all the knowledge and expertise you gained, and change one thing from your childhood, what would that be?
This is a theme, and it's in the book as well. I was so hard. If you think about, I'm going to just tell you a quick story because this will put it into perspective. I played piano from 5 to 10 years old, and I loved making music. I actually really enjoyed that. But as I was playing, if I'd miss a note or play something wrong, I remember very, very vividly, probably at 7 or 8, I would bite my fingers so hard that I'd either bleed or have pain, because I was so mad at myself for not getting it right, for not getting it perfect. And if I go back to that little girl, I'm like, oh, sweetheart, you're doing such a good job. You're playing, and so many kids don't get this opportunity, and rewrite that script, because the script, and even going through medical school, we almost punish ourselves and push ourselves to such extreme. And I would go back and say, there's kindness here that actually will get you farther. And if you're listening out there and you are feeling like you don't measure up or whatever, there's a script in your head that's telling you you're not enough. And that harshness that we have to ourselves, if we could rewrite that script and be kind, we'd actually get a lot farther. And in my last decade of life so far, as I've been more kind and more spacious and not as driven, I accomplished so much more with that kind of framework. And I love telling people that, because I think all of us have those kinds of scripts that are harsh to ourselves. And that's what I would rewrite in my own life.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I think about that same analogy. We have little kids and they're growing up, and they're trying to take their first steps. They don't take 2 steps and we get on them. They take 2 steps and we clap and applaud because we're so excited. We should do the same thing in our own life. We're able to take a few steps forward. Even though we fall down, we should applaud ourselves, not beat ourselves up. I mean, that's so great. Jill, this has been so awesome, informative. It's been inspiring. I love the messages that you put out for patients so that they have hope and all the things they do. Moving forward, as far as that goes, how can patients connect with you and learn more about you? You have great newsletters and stuff, because I'm on all the lists myself. Can you tell me let patients know, and our listeners, how they can follow you and learn more about what you do, Jill?
Thank you, Steve. All of my work and blogs and everything is at my website, jillcarnahan.com. You can follow me for silliness on Instagram at just Dr. Jill Carnahan. And of course, there's a YouTube channel on YouTube that has lots of podcasts and episodes there as well.
Very good. We'll make sure all that's in the show notes for people to link on as far as that goes. I truly want to thank you. Thanks for your time. It's such an awesome ability to get to interview you and spend some time with you. And I really appreciate you sharing a lot of openness about your journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.